Hello, my name is Jocelyn Weddell, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a presentation depicting what life was like for Americans living on the prairie from 1820 through 1860. The object of this presentation is both to share the knowledge I have obtained through my research and to shed light on a critically influential period in the history of our proud nation. I have some notes over to the side here, so if you see me looking that way, that's what that's about. First of all, I want to reflect on the fact that life on the American prairie is understood among modern Americans like you and me as depicted by media such as the Little House on the Prairie series, which is awesome. I've always loved it, but it is incomplete as a means of learning about the truth of frontier life as a whole. So, with that understanding, we're going to discuss some major events and historical context. Then we will move into discussing the true facts of the frontier residents' culture, responsibilities, and religion. So first of all, some historical context. The Indian Removal Act, a tragic though extremely critical part of the early development of American society, is a huge talking point because it created this whole idea of the natives being a problem to be solved. And the colonists' victory in that respect hugely shaped the way colonists viewed their positions as pioneers in westward expansion. They had viewed themselves as completely right in seizing independence and now in seizing the land for which they had fought and struggled for so long. Following that, we have the era of good feelings preceding the Panic of 1819, the Compromise of 1820, which shaped the general attitude towards slavery and Mississippi's involvement as a slave state, the Panic of 1837, which lasted until 1843, the Preemption Act, Second Party System, and the development of Democrats versus Whigs, and then lastly, the Trail of Tears and the Second Seminole War. The Trail of Tears specifically was viewed very poorly among most Americans, but the fear of the natives was unavoidable at this point in the development of the nation. All of these events and plenty more, which are deserving of their own presentations, shaped the worldview of your average frontiersman leading into and well into the 19th century. So now we're going to move a little further along the allotted timeline and observe some more personal details. For example, here in the responsibilities slice of life segment, we can see that thanks to the fact that by the 1830s, America was in a position to develop its culture so rapidly, a stream of scientific advancement made life ever-changing for frontier dwellers. For example, the invention of John Deere's steel plow was incredibly relevant because of the positive impact it had on agricultural growth. This invention and literally countless others aided families in becoming more productive. I'm going to share with you a quote from one of my reference books, The Growth of the American Republic, which reads, quote, "The army and the destruction of the buffalo took care of the Indian. Barbed wire solved the fencing problem. The windmill, dry farming, and irrigation went far to overcome the effect of insufficient rainfall and intermittent droughts, and the railroad furnished transportation. All of these things were incredibly relevant to the average prairie-dwelling family. And again, the constant invention of new and efficient devices and technology aided homesteaders in their day-to-day life. Although homesteading was the dominant factor in the lives of people living on the frontier, those who wished to obtain a profession outside of farming typically pursued an education in medicine or lawyering. The latter was achieved by this process of, instead of saving up money and attending some faraway law school, which was impractical for them, young men wishing to build a profession would spend years watching courtroom contests. They would literally just learn by first-hand experience, watching people who were already lawyers. And after years of observing the manner and conduct of the professionals, they would enter the workforce. They would be allowed to work small and progressively more relevant cases until they themselves were lawyers. This process is quite different than the modern education system, but it was efficient and good for that time. Moving on, we'll discuss their culture and some issues of the day. Going into the 1830s, the common frontiersmen typically held either the position of nationalism, whereupon their support would lie in encouraging a strong central government and patriotic ideals of union, or sectionalism, where they would prioritize the rights of individual states before the overall union. This is important because we have to understand that the average person back then was so invested in politics because they could not afford to be ignorant. The fundamentals were still being established at this time. From there, we have the Seneca Falls Conference in New York in 1848, which marked the beginning of women's suffrage movement, although it was almost immediately interrupted by the Civil War. This conference brought to light the extent of the discrimination against women and the increasing desire for change and for equality. Slavery was still a divisive topic, with Southerners clinging to their beliefs that it was just the superior viewpoint, the way things had to be. Tragically, not much would change in this respect, and not much would change for the rights of Black people until later in the 1860s, and even after the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves really didn't have many options outside of living as slaves. But in the end, this time period developed a deep-rooted culture built on the strength of the people, their lives centered around cattle raising, mining, and farming, and this led to the cultivation of a common attitude expressed in the social attitudes, legal institutions, and art and literature of the time. Lastly, we'll look at religion in communities and families. Largely shaped by the revival and lingering results of the Second Great Awakening, Methodists and Baptists were the most common religious groups dispersed in the Midwest. The Mormons also had their place, specifically concentrated in Utah. Obviously, there were other denominations as well, but they just didn't come close in relevancy to the Methodists and Baptists, especially with the surge in camp meetings. This was one of my favorite things to read about because if you think about the prairie dwellers, these are families living on plots of hundreds of acres of land. They did not load up in the family SUV and go to church every Sunday. And so these camp meetings were this just place of gathering together with like-minded individuals that was invaluable at the time for these families. I think about it a lot in the way that people my age view youth camps. You're going to be around other like-minded individuals to learn and worship together, which was incredibly invaluable to these people. From here, the American people would go on to face World War I, women's suffrage, the Great Depression, and many more events that would devastate, rebuild, and shape the country. Now, an increasingly industrial America has become the norm. However, the heart and soul of the nation have been shaped by and continue to rest on the shoulders of the people who most resemble those prairie dwellers of old. Proud, hardworking, truly American country folk. This concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time.